Hello, and welcome to Medieval Lulls, a new close reading series from the London Review of Books. I'm Irina Dumitrescu.
And I'm Mary Wellesley.
And we are both writers, literary historians, and contributors to the paper. In this series, we are asking, was the Middle Ages funny? And to answer that today, we are looking at one of the best-known plays in English before Shakespeare, a comic tale about sheep theft and the birth of Jesus. We're speaking, of course, about the Second Shepherds Pageant. Mary, tell us a little bit about the Second Shepherds Pageant. Where do we find this work?
Well, it's in a manuscript which is in the Huntington Library in California, and it's a so-called mystery play or a Corpus Christi pageant play. There are lots of different words for this kind of type of text, but the important point is it's a theatrical text. That said, our understanding of what theatre is very different from the medieval understanding of what theatre is. There's some scholarship on this that refers to the author of this play as the Wakefield master. So we don't know who wrote it, and we don't know actually if there are multiple different authors. But there's this one figure who has been called the Wakefield master for quite a long time in the scholarship because of this very specific rhyme scheme that he or she uses. So the Wakefield master is clearly a very brilliant playwright, and he or she is working in the 15th century. So these kinds of plays that were part of the mystery play cycles, as they're called, so called because they were on religious themes, supposedly revealing mysteries, religious mysteries. Many of them were performed at the Feast of Corpus Christi, which is the 30th of May, performed outside, and we have 4 different manuscripts that contain these big cycles of plays, of which there are kind of these discrete texts within the whole cycle, which tells the kind of Christian story from creation to doom. And so, you start with Genesis and you go all the way through. And each kind of episode is a sort of different play in itself. Now, of these 4 surviving cycles, at least 2 of them seem to have been specific forms of kind of civic drama. So they were performed in particular towns and often performed by trade guilds, which was sort of somewhere between a trade guild but also a kind of religious confraternity. And they were financed by these trade guilds. So if you were part of the guild of ironmongers, for example, you paid a little kind of tithe every year, which contributed to the cost of putting on these plays. And there's a kind of quite sweet thing that sometimes the specific guild, their trade had a sort of resonance for the story. So you find in the York is one of these big cycles. In the York play of the crucifixion is done by the pinners, so the makers of nails. It's a kind of bleak irony.
They'd know, yeah.
Yeah. And the story of Noah in one of the cycles, I can't remember which one, is done by the shipbuilders. So there's a kind of certain resonance. I think that the important thing is that these were dramas that were performed very much in the community. And often, if you went to go and watch these, they might have been, there's some kind of scholarly debate about how this one was actually performed. Was it performed on a kind of wagon that moved through the city and it was like a moving stage and you stood in the street and saw it? Or did the audience move kind of symbolically through the streets, visiting each of the kind of stages, the sort of scaffolds along the way? But the point about these plays was that they were very regular occurrences. They happened every year, possibly more than that. They were a kind of key part of the sort of community's life. And, the figure of the actor, a bit like sort of amateur dramatics today, the figure of the actor hamming it up at the mystery plays was something so kind of well known that we even find, there's this group of letters called the Paston Letters, which were written by 4 generations of a family in 15th century Norfolk. And in one of the letters, it talks about somebody being so angry they were like Herod in the mystery plays, And this idea of these kind of stock comic evil characters being so extreme that they're just kind of referred to in these other texts. We have also references in Chaucer. So this is theatre, but it's a very different kind of theatre. It's a theatre that's much more within the community, and where actually a lot of the sort of dramatic tension can be derived from the fact that we might know these figures on stage, and they're performing very much kind of within us and amongst us. You know, there's much less of a kind of separation between audience and players. And we'll see in this play, there's a moment where the actors on stage acknowledge the audience. You know, there's the sort of that membrane between audience and actors is a permeable one.
It feels a little like the way college plays often are today, right? That it's the students, playing for the students, and then everything takes on a particular resonance because you know the the actors' backstories, and that shades into the characters. But I mean, this is a funny play because it's about the nativity, right? Technically, that's what it's about, and that does happen at the end. But it's mostly not about that,
I mean, it's barely
It's
about that.
I mean, and then at the same time, it's about it the whole time,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's sort of one of the interesting. It's a very well crafted play, is what we're trying to say. It's very well done. It's not, they didn't sleep on the job, but it's a kind of feint. Like you don't get the main story point until the very end, which then colors everything that has come before it. I mean, I think it's a sophisticated play, but the setup is quite simple. We have three parts. You could call them three scenes. In the first one, we meet the three shepherds who are out in pasture, and they lament their state. We'll talk about that in a moment. And Mac enters, who is a known thief, and they all go to sleep. Mac indeed steals sheep, takes it back home to his wife, who just seems to give birth every year, sometimes twice a year, and he's complained already about how many kids she makes she produces, and how little bread he has to feed them. And they come up with a plot to hide the sheep. So knowing that the shepherds will come looking for their missing sheep, they bundle up the animal and make it look like her baby, and she pretends to have just given birth. And of course, the shepherds do come, and there's a scene at Mac's house where they are tricked at first because the baby is so bundled up that they don't see its face, and they're sorry for having made the mistake of thinking that there would be a sheep there in the house. I guess it's a quiet sheep too. It doesn't baa at all. But just as they're about to leave, they realize they haven't given the baby any gifts. And so they move to give the child gifts, and they want to see it in order to do so. And that's when they realize it is a very ugly baby. It's a very unusual looking baby. So you get this kind of, situational humor where Mac and Jill, his wife, are trying to pretend that this really is their baby. It's come out as a monster. It's, been stolen by elves and so on. And of course, the shepherds aren't fooled, and they punish Mac by tossing him in a linen cloth. And only then, in a final scene, do you get the shepherds basically going to visit the baby
Yeah,
Jesus,
an
which is the
angel
actual
appears to
name,
them, as in the biblical story of Luke. Yeah.
and calls them to visit Mary and Jesus. And so you have the actual nativity scene, and they bring gifts, and they worship Christ. And it's a very economical story. So you could have just a cast of five, because Mac and Jill can be doubled with the angel and Mary. You could even do it with just two locations, because you could have the outdoors as a pasture and one indoor space. So you could have the Mac and Jill's house could also double as the manger in the nativity scene. And obviously the staging would affect how people read it and how people saw the parallels, which we'll talk about in a moment, are very much there to be seen.
Yeah, it's such a striking reinvention of what is essentially a slightly boring story. So the shepherds are, they're waiting in their fields, and then an angel comes and tells them that Christ has been born, and then they go to Bethlehem and see the baby, and sort of end of story. And it only appears in one of the Gospels. I'm right about that, isn't it? I think it's only in Luke. So there's not a huge amount to work with. right? And so therefore it's kind of hilarious to have put this whole comic interlude on at the beginning. And the first time you read it, you think, well, what on earth was the point of that? And then you start to see these kind of wonderful parallels, and actually there's a really important point that's being made here about it's the kindness and the generosity of the shepherds that is ultimately the undoing of Mac and Jill. So that they circle back. They've left. They've believed the trickery, and then they turn back in order to present this baby with a sixpence because they feel that's very important. And we've had this whole thing at the beginning where the shepherds are saying that they're very poor. So it's a big thing for them to present this gift to this child, whereupon they see that it has horns and it's been swaddled so tight that you can't see its feet.
If you enjoy hearing about medieval literature, you can listen to our full 12-episode series, Medieval Beginnings, right now as part of the LRB's Close Readings podcast subscription. Sign up directly in Apple Podcasts or in other podcast apps. There are links for those below.